Chapter 7. What's in the box? Ashley zipped through traffic, breaking every type of traffic law in place. Her car's AI routinely would remind her of the life-threatening statistics about the violations she was committing. She and David ignored the incessant reminders. David's head was pounding from his ever-present headache, and with the adrenaline from their escape mostly settling, he could also feel the aches of his body from everything that had just occurred. His ribs on his right side ached every time he inhaled, a constant reminder of when the big agent had plowed his forearm into him and rocked him into the water cooler, while both his left and right knuckles were red and cut from where he had driven them into the agent's face. Only his right hand ached. He used that hand to strike the agent twice. His lungs and legs ached from the non-stop running they had to endure during the escape, but overall, he was shockingly in all right shape. He looked over at Ashley. Her face was still covered in streaks of eye makeup from her tears and the sprinkler water. She was biting her lower lip as she leaned forward towards the dash, maneuvering through the cars. Otherwise, there was no evidence of physical damage to her that he could see. "Did you get hurt in any of that?" he asked her. She looked over quickly, then turned her gaze back on the road. "No, I mean my feet are a little banged up from not having on shoes or anything, but I'm okay otherwise, I guess," she replied, still with a heightened level of worry in her voice. David looked in the rearview mirror and then at the road ahead. "I don't see any cars behind us, you know. We may be safer and better hidden if we slow down and keep a lower profile. All this could lead to cops, and cops lead back to the agents," he said, trying to get her to settle down some. She looked over at him again and then back to the road. Her features softened some, and she said, "You're right. I'm just so overloaded with all this. I'm not thinking straight. Car, please take control." She placed her hand on the auto drive sensor and winced for a moment. At the same moment, David felt a sharp pang in his head, causing him to wince as well. The car arrived at David's apartment 15 minutes later, and they jumped out and headed for the door. "All right, get in and get out," David said. "If there's nothing here, we will have to reassess real freaking quickly." As they approached the door, his neighbor Steve popped up from his own door and walked over quickly with a "how do you do" smile. No, not right now," thought David, as he quickly fumbled for his keys in his pockets. "Hey Dave, you are home early today. Are you looking to get that side of the yard mowed today?" asked Steve. David sucked in a deep breath and held it for a moment. "Yeah, fuck it," thought David to himself, and he swiftly turned around to face Steve, and in a harsh, snapping voice he stated, "For the love of that forgetful, goofy-looking wife of your sake, Steve, my name is goddamn David. Dave is not my fucking name, you narrow-minded, long-forehead fuck. No, I am not here to mow the goddamn grass. I hate mowing the grass. I hope it grows and grows and grows until it starts to take over your apartment, and you and that nameless lump of flesh you married must eat grass soup for the next 10 years of your bleak lives. Okay?" Steve's mouth muscle must have stopped working. All he did was stare back at David, showing the inside of his mouth off as he gaped it in utter shell shock. David smiled and turned around, unlocked the door, let Ashley in, who looked a little shocked herself, and said as he walked in, "Good day, Steve." He rushed to his room and to the closet, with Ashley following behind. He opened the small closet door and reached up to a shelf above the hangers, stretching for a moment before feeling the box he was searching for and pulling it down. It was covered in a couple layers of dust, but you could still tell it was one of those keepsake type of boxes. David took it to the bed, sat it down, and opened it. He had never opened this box before. Not knowing who his father never was an issue before. Sure, it was something that crossed his mind every now and then, but since he only had fragmental memories of the man, it didn't seem very important while he was doped up on Chembal. That, and his mother once telling him the box held nothing for them when he was about 10 years old. Having the contents defined as irrelevant by his mother had caused him to reduce the box as an item that he simply had to lug around as a reminder of someone he barely knew. He even thought once that if he ever left the apartment, he would just toss the box. After all, it had no value otherwise. Inside the box were several odd items. David saw dog tags. Looks like his father served the military too. He wondered if it was mandatory for his father like it was for him, or if he volunteered. He found a couple DVDs, which was crazy since almost no one used hard copies of media anymore. It was all software and cloud-based applications. There was a thick notebook with a black cover, lacking any label to indicate the contents inside. As David removed the notebook, David felt his blood run cold to find a gun resting in the box. "A gun? In my house this whole time?" he said softly. David knew how to fire a gun. He had to learn during his service, but with crime rates in his area so low, he never saw the need for one, and therefore left them to his past. But it turned out he was harboring one in his home this whole time. He picked it up to examine it, and he noticed underneath 2 additional clips. His attention went back to the gun. It was a simple 9mm handgun, black with a wooden grip. The grip caught his eye because on the grip was a symbol. He looked closer and saw an eagle's head, but not exactly like the eagle that is used on UCA and old USA propaganda. This one looked different somehow. "That's not quite what eagles look like to you, do they?" he asked Ashley, and she looked at the image as well. "No, but they have been cloning them for years, so maybe they looked different at some point, as undesirable traits were removed from the DNA sequencing," she said in response. The eagle on the grip was facing straight ahead, and the feathers on the sides of its head, if it was supposed to be feathers, looked different. They looked like some sort of helmet. He turned his attention to the black notebook and opened it to the first page and began to read the contents. "I don't know how else to start this. Quite frankly, this writing crap was never my style. But this shit is getting serious these days, and with Joyce being pregnant, I figured if anything happens, I want our child to have something to know me by." David paused for a moment. "Joyce is my mother's name." He wrote a journal. "For me," he said automatically, and then went back reading. The year is 2025, and today marks the 4th anniversary of the Silent War. Just another one they won't ever talk about. I, as well as thousands, hell, maybe millions, I don't really know. But a bunch of us kids got shipped off to fight a war for the government. Only it wasn't really a war of governments. It was a fucking corporate takeover. These so-called politicians, who either have ownership stakes or simply are paid by the corp giants of the world, sent a bunch of us off to other parts of the world to break down worldwide supply chains, or to kill enough idealistic independent leaders that no one was left standing but them. We were just a bunch of barely legal morons, almost all of us from the bottom barrel of what we call, or are starting to call, the United Countries of America, or just UCA. It's only after you watch other young men and women your age dying brutal deaths in a skirmish that takes place in a foreign country's factory and its parking lot that you realize something isn't right. No one was able to put it together back then. How could we? We just knew it was wrong. It didn't feel like the patriotic thing to die for somehow. But we did it anyway and came back with bad habits, some pats on the back, and a lot of bad memories. I spent a lot of time afterwards drunk. David's whole body felt numb. He didn't realize how much it meant to him to read his lost father's words. It didn't really help with the current situation he and Ashley found themselves in, but it meant something to him nonetheless. And he hated himself a little bit inside for never once opening this box up until today. "David," Ashley said, "I'm sure this might be important to you, but right now, we should be looking for anything that can be useful to us." David looked at her and nodded. Yeah, I'll flip forward a little bit here. Maybe there's something." He did get sent to be reassigned, so maybe he knew someone or something we can look for. He flipped forward a few pages and picked up reading halfway through a section. "Shit's getting serious out there. The power plants are not only being built damn near everywhere at this point, but even those new pylons that help connect the power plants to farther out areas. The suits are hiring everyone it can get its hands on to help with the manpower part of the expansion. Of course, one of the regulations for getting hired on is you must be balanced chemically, which is code for take our fucking pills and or you are Saul. Con artist, bunch of vultures flying overhead, and no one is looking. Well, I shouldn't say no one. Jason, Eddie, Vance, and myself got in touch with a fella named Nex. He let us in on something that made a lot of sense. The numbers aren't true, and the truth is, there's plenty out there wanting to push back. Our son David, he was just born, but when I look at him, and I see him looking back, I don't want to ever look into those eyes and see a walking veg like all those chemdogs out there. We are seeing Nex tonight." The reference to a man named Nex jumped out at David and sent a shiver down his spine. He remembered now that was the name the agents mentioned when they were talking about someone Ashley had information on. He looked at her. She was scrolling through her phone, weighing the options they could take. "Who's next?" David asked directly. She looked up at him. Her brow was crinkled up. "I don't know. Just a weird name I heard at that charge station on Randall Street. Some guys, you know the type at that station. They talked about how some guy named Nex got word on something big that was going to go down, and that he needed bodies to get things in motion. But nobody wanted in. Why?" she said curiously. Before David could finish his thought, the sound of tires screeching outside the front of his door jarred his attention away from the conversation. "Shit," he said and looked at Ashley, whose face matched his fear. "They found us," she said. They both jumped to their feet, but before they began to run off, David grabbed Ashley's hand. "Wait," he hissed. "If we make a move now, they will find us. We must be careful how we play this." "What do we do then?" she asked. David looked around, then realized something. "Leave your phone. I bet that's one of the reasons they knew to come here and not your place," he whispered. "And let's wait before we bolt for a door. If it's the agents, I'm willing to bet they will go from both the front and back doors at the same time." "So, you want to wait to leave here until they are in here with us?" she hissed back, fear rising in whisper. "Once they are in here, they won't be outside. We slip through the window and make a break for that charge station." Then the front door and back door both opened with a bang. No voices or demanding commands were given out from either side, and David knew that meant they were on bag and tag mission. This wasn't going to be friendly, like at the office. He grabbed his father's notebook. He wanted to read more about the man's life and see if maybe he could even find out where he was sent off to when he was reassigned. The gun and the military-issued knife that reminded David of the same one he was given for his time in the service. He unlocked his bedroom window quickly and let Ashley jump through. He was next. They dashed to the front yard, around to the driveway. The agents had blocked Ashley's car in, and getting out would be quite tricky. "Wait," thought David. "No, it won't. There's all this grass here without a car in the way," he thought, with a smile creeping across his face. Ashley hopped into the driver's seat, and on his way to the passenger side, David took the slightly longer path around the car's trunk, so that he could pass the agent's front right tire and stab at it quickly with the rusting knife from his father's box. Then he hopped in. Ashley started the car. It came to life, and they both knew the sound would attract attention immediately. "Go through Steve's yard!" yelled David, and Ashley threw the shift into reverse and cut the wheel so that she could try to get past the agent's car and into the yard. As she pulled back, the bumper of her car collided with the right headlight of the agent's car, making an even louder sound. "Fuck!" yelled Ashley, which was so unlike her, it surprised David. He had never heard her cuss like that before. He looked up, and the two agents appeared in the doorway. The fat man raised his gun and took a shot. The windshield cracked, but it was only a tranq dart, and instead of penetrating through to them, it logged itself into the plexiglass of the windshield. "Go! Go!" yelled David, as more tranq darts began to be dropped on them. Ashley flipped the car forward to give herself some more room. As she did, Madsen ran at the car and grabbed onto the driver's side door handle. She had locked it, smart girl. But the agent was a big man, and he decided after 2 quick yanks to start a new approach. He threw his right elbow into the glass of the window. It began to crack. Ashley let out a scream as she flipped the car back into reverse and pushed her foot all the way down on the pedal. The tires spun for a moment, then the car took off with the agent holding onto the door for a moment. As she hit the street, the car spun, and she shifted forward. The whiplash of the action caused Madsen to lose his grip on the handle. As he went rolling away from the car, they heard a loud plastic thunk sound come from her driver's side door. They took off down the road. David's mind was racing. If they could track the phone, what else could they track? He thought. He looked over at Ashley. "Is there anything in this car that they could use to track us?" he asked her. She looked over at him quickly, then back to the road. "Technically, yes, the car's AI and GPS systems, but I don't know how to stop that," she replied. "Don't worry," said David. "I know. I did it with my car, actually." He took the knife and then wildly stabbed at the screen where the AI's program was attached. Unlike with his car, where he simply disconnected it from the car's other systems, he wanted to make sure this one had no way to give out any information on them. After he ripped every piece out of the AI's area, he opened his window and tossed the remains out. But as he looked back, he saw the agents were in their car and attempting to catch up. Ashley had seen it too, and before David could say anything, she let out, "There's just no way. How are we going to get somewhere without them seeing?" "They only have 3 working tires," David said. "They can't maneuver like you can." She looked over quickly at David, nerves and sweat beginning to wear her face down, and he realized they would have to find a point of rest soon. Ashley looked back at the road ahead, seeing a 4-way stop upcoming as she bit down on her lower lip and jerked the wheel to the right lane. The agent's black car also jerked, although not as quickly, and the car lurched left to compensate for the flat right tire. She took a hard right at the 4-way, cutting through traffic. Car horns blew as she raced through the intersection, and the agent's car screamed past as well, though their turn was not as clean as hers. They lost some ground as they dealt with the car's front right tire and the traffic that had come to a halt in the middle of the intersection when Ashley raced through. Passing through the afternoon traffic as quickly as they could, David couldn't help but realize that they were only going about 35 miles per hour, and thought how the movies always made it seem like the situation was so much faster paced. The reality of traffic grounded those types of expectations. He had also learned that same lesson during the madness of the chase in the office, where all of this started. Ashley cut off David's thoughts with a sharp left onto another road. This time she had cut off from the right outermost lane, and in the process, cut off several lanes of oncoming traffic. Again, horns blew as cars came to a screeching halt. Some even collided with each other, which David noted would make the job of chasing that much harder for the now severely trailing agents. "I think a few more moves like that and we might lose them," David declared. Ashley didn't take her eyes off the road this time. "All that will be for nothing if the charge station is a bust, or even worse, if we get in a wreck on the way." David could tell all this was becoming too fatalistic for her. They needed to get away. They needed to find shelter. If not, at least for a couple hours to settle down some. He also needed some time to breathe. He wanted to rest. The aches from the big agent plowing through him were really beginning to settle in his ribcage, and he felt a shot of pain every time he took too deep a breath. Not to mention all the running, and he wanted to read more of this journal his father had written. He looked over at her, then behind them again. "They are just now getting past that last turn," he said. "I think if we risk one more big traffic cut, we may get through this." Ashley took a deep breath and whispered, "Okay, okay." David wasn't sure if that was her talking to him or herself. She began to push on the gas again as she saw the next oncoming busy intersection. Then David had a thought. "Wait," he said, and she looked over with wild, frantic fire in her eyes. "Slow down some. Let them get in close." "Why?" she asked, not sure what game he was playing at. "Do you want to let them catch us now, after all this running?" No, David said in return. "If we let them get closer, when we make the move, they will follow at the same speed. Maybe the cars will cause them problems, but maybe not. Either way, if we let them stay that length behind, they are sure to catch us." Ashley slowed down, just enough to the point where the agent's car was now 2 car lengths behind. Suddenly, the big agent's head and right arm came out of the passenger window of the car with a pistol in hand, aimed forward. David looked through the side door mirror that read in little letters, "Objects in mirror are closer than they appear," and thought to himself, "God, I hope not." He could see the agent's face. There was bruising appearing on the left side where David's fist had left their marks, and it seemed the agent's nose may also have been broken. He did not look happy now. The agent squeezed off 4 rounds. A dull thud rang throughout the car as one of the bullets made contact with the car. Another round got closer to the bullseye, striking the passenger side mirror. David took in a sharp and very, very painful breath and let out a reactionary, "Oh shit," as the sparks and shards of plastic and glass exploded from the gunshot. The window, which was rolled up, was now covered in cracks from the ricochet of the shot. At that moment, Ashley made a hard, sharp right into an intersection of cars, trying to go from point A to point B in their daily automated car rides, perfectly brought to them by whatever company, be it Aerogate Solutions or Census Tech, that made the cars they were using. Again, horns blared, and this time more cars collided with one another, pushing others forward. Even AI can't brake fast enough when something truly unexpected runs into its little automated and planned world. thought David to himself with slight satisfaction. Halfway through the turn, an 18-wheeler truck was firmly stopped in the path they were on. There was no time for them to stop. They were too far into the motion and too close to the truck. David yelled at the top of his lungs, ignoring the blinding pain in his ribs. "Duck!" It was quick, faster than a second. David was not sure, and would never really be able to think how it was possible. He didn't even have time to look over and see if Ashley understood what he meant when he said duck. He just put his head down, as far as it could go. He heard metallic scraping overhead, the loud, unnerving moan of metal giving way to other metal. Then nothing. He looked up. The roof of the car had been damaged horribly. In fact, it was gone. He looked over at Ashley, her hands over the back of her head, but her head was still there, and by the nervous twitching of her hands, alive. He looked back quickly. The roof of the car was still attached, but dangling on the backside of the car now. The agents hadn't been able to follow through the underbelly of the badly damaged semi-truck. The sounds of horns and raised voices asking, "What happened? Is everyone okay? I gotta put this on my feed," came from the other side of the truck. He looked over at Ashley. "Are you okay? Can you drive? Do you want me to take over? I think we might be able to lose them now if we move quick." She didn't move or say anything, and David grew worried about her condition, as well as the situation with the agents. If they knew that car was stopped on the other side of the truck, they may have tried to approach on foot. In a tired and wavering voice, she finally answered, not yet moving her head up from its down-facing position. "I'm okay. Let's go. I can still drive." She looked up, fresh tears in her eyes as she started the car back up and began to move. David looked back and didn't see the agents in pursuit. They had a window here, and they needed a miracle to keep this luck up. 20 minutes later, they arrived at the shifty charge station David spent most of the last couple years avoiding. The car's engine was making a mechanical whimpering sound as they came to a slow stop in front of the station's entrance. A couple of scruffy men came up to the car as David and Ashley got out. One of the men, the one on David's side of the car, had a shot of red hair. It was straight red hair, but was slicked back with some sort of gel. His face was covered in pockmarks and freckles. Without looking up from the car as his hand rubbed across the dents, he spoke to David in a weaselly voice that sounded like it belonged to someone who was still wrapping up the second half of puberty. "Car's fucked, buddy. I don't think a charge-up is going to help any." Before David had a chance to respond, the other man also spoke. He was on Ashley's side, almost mimicking the same body language, pretending to not be looking at David or Ashley while checking out the damage of the car with his hand. Except he had darker, longer hair. His skin had no blemishes, and his voice was deeper. "Yeah, car's fucked, dude, but if the lady needs it tuned up, I know a guy." As he said the last part of his remark, he looked up with a smile. His teeth, while crooked, were probably as white as David's. David quickly realized that these first moments were important. He had to weigh his response carefully. They weren't going to be like Simon, or anyone else they ran into up to this point. These guys were not popping Chembal. They might be taking other things for all David knew. But the simple fact that they weren't on Chembal meant they would be less contained, less predictable, and more dangerous. He cleared his throat and spoke, trying his best not to let his nerves and fear show. "We heard some guys around here talk about a person named Nex. We want to meet them, now." He was hoping these guys weren't just junkies of a different variety and would know what this Nex business was all about. The weasel spoke up again. "Mr. Business fucking Casual Flannel over here got some balls, don't he?" He started moving closer to David. As he moved closer to David, the other fellow took a few steps towards Ashley, but stayed closer to the hood. The weasel was in David's face, his yellow teeth and rancid breath radiating from his mouth, reeking of cheap charge station food and neglect. "If I knew what the fuck you were talking about, Mr. Stick-Up Yo Ass, what makes you think I would tell a mark like you? You think because you rolled up in a shit wagon with a few scraps and a bitch that cried a little means I'm going to believe anything that spews out of your perfect little chemdog mouth?" David realized this situation was getting serious. He knew that they had entered a world that he only briefly had been close to a long time ago. Even then, it wasn't like this. In the military, the pissing competitions and shows of bravado was tapered down heavy with Chembal and other drugs. He thought about the old movies he enjoyed. In situations like this, what was the move? Act like them, but worse. David leaned in, so that the weasel couldn't see him reposition his footing. "Listen, you greasy weasel fuck, I already knocked around an SDT buff today. What makes you think this doesn't end with me taking a piss on what's left of you?" David knew that his response was going to elicit a reaction, and he suspected the weasel would try a cheap shot. Just as he anticipated, the weasel's response was quick. It happened so fast, David couldn't really tell you how it all played out so quickly. Ignoring the screaming aches and pains from his body, he quickly brought his head back and threw his forehead into the weasel's nose. The weasel let out a shriek of surprised pain, dropping something short and shiny on the ground. David's world was spinning. He executed the headbutt perfectly, but that didn't let him escape the dizziness of banging your head against another solid object. Luckily, adrenaline was on his side, and the weasel's friend was tripping over himself as he yelled curse words and tried to make his way to the other side of the car. David quickly reached out with both hands, grabbed the greasy, gelled red hair of the flailing weasel, and threw his right knee up as he thrusted the weasel's head down. The shrieking from the weasel stopped as he fell into the still dizzy David. The other man had made it to the other side of the car now as David was stumbling backwards from the weight of the weasel and his own instability. The man was on him quick, running into David and tackling him to the ground. Just like the weasel, he had a small shiny thing in his hand, and David was still trying to figure out how he ended up on the ground after he thought the weasel was knocked out cold. As the man lifted his arm to bring the knife down on David, something solid appeared next to his face, then shattered into small green pieces. He roared out in pain. The small green glass sprinkled over David's chest, and the man had thrown himself away from his position on David and was holding on to his face with both his hands as he screamed. David looked over and saw Ashley standing about 4 feet away. She had an empty beer bottle in her hand, and David realized as his head cleared, she had thrown a beer bottle at the man's head, and with amazing accuracy landed a face shot. "You fucking bitch!" roared the man, as his left hand started to fumble around the ground for something. "I'm gonna gut you, you chemdog bitch ass, you fuck!" "Shut the fuck up, Gil. You ain't gonna do shit to nobody," a deep, hard voice said. Ashley and David both diverted their attention from the man on the ground to the front entrance of the station. David immediately recognized the man. It was the older, angry man behind the register, the one with the long facial scar that started from his forehead's left side and went all the way down and across to the right side of his chin. "Gil, grab Trace, wake him up if you can, and get this fucking yellow mark out of sight before any authority types see it here." The man with long, silky dark hair, darker skin with perfect complexion, and all those shiny, crooked white teeth looked up at the scarred man. Without saying anything, he pulled a few more pieces of glass from some small cuts in his face, went over to the weasel. The weasel wasn't fully recovered, but he had begun to show signs of coming to. They quickly got into Ashley's yellow mark car together and took off down a back alley. The scarred man looked over at David and Ashley and in his deep, hard voice said, "What the fuck you standing there for? You want to see necks or get popped by the SDT?"